Okay, so we're going to start first by talking about the grade sheet that you just got back. I like to walk through, this is what my grade sheet looks like, and there's a lot of information on it because I try to make it as easy as possible to see everything all at once. And the first time you look at it, it might be a little confusing, so I'm going to walk you through what everything means. Before I even get into that, though, if your grade is not where you want it to be, chances are it's because you haven't done enough comments yet. And this early in the semester, the comments, which are worth 5% of your overall grade, is about the same as your first assignment, which you just turned in. At the end of the semester, 5% versus 40% in your assignments and 30% for your final, it doesn't count nearly as much. So in the beginning, it's a big penalty. At the end, it's not so bad. Good news about comments is you can always add them. And it doesn't matter, even though I say, 3 on this assignment, 3 on that, etc., it's a total number of comments for the semester. I don't go in and cross you off on, you did 3 on this particular exercise or whatever. It's just a total comment count. So if you add more now, like let's say you're behind a few, start writing 4 comments instead of 3, and you'll get yourself caught back up relatively easily. Brooke, you had a question? So no, it's always 3. So on an exercise, it's 3, and on an assignment, it's 3, unless I say you don't need to comment on it. So like the one, I think it was the one where we cut things out, I said you don't need to comment on it, so that doesn't have any assigned to it. The other thing about it is it's not official until the end of the semester. So if you missed a few, like in your case, Brooke, you did 1 instead of 3, just start adding a couple extra comments each day, and you'll catch yourself right back up. And it's not a permanent grade. It's not in the grade book until the very end of the semester. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on the grade sheet. There is a couple errors for those of you that added on the wait list. Nick, Seth, and Brooke, I'll correct yours and give you reprints. I didn't catch that, obviously, in time. The big box that we care about, obviously, is current grade. Your name will be here. It's blurred out on my little slide here. It will give you your percentage and your grade. If you're passing the class, it'll be green. So everything's color-coded too, so you can quickly glance at things. Above that, in the column above, this is the class average. So right now, the class average, well, this is an old slide, was 88. I forget what your class average is right now. It's 86. So you'll always be able to see what the class average is on everything. Next little column over, let me wipe this real quick. There we go. Next little column over, this one here, those are your assignments and how they all stack up. Your first assignment grade would be right there. Above it would be the class average for that. So yours is always below. Above it is going to be the class average. If you see a bunch of orange zeros next to it there, no surprise, we haven't done those assignments yet. So they don't count yet. But they're going to be little empty holes for the time being. Your exercises total will be there. Your comments total will be there. And then your overall total grade will be there. As we continue looking over here, if we look at the comment section is pretty simple. The number above is how many comments I think you should have. Again, the slide's old, so I don't know how many you guys were supposed to have. It looks like 22 as well. And below that number is the number of comments you currently have. So like I said, if you're behind, just add some more. The good news is it's not a fixed number. So as long as you're getting there, you'll end up doing just fine. The number is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 for the semester, just in terms of where we're going. If you don't do any comments along the way, writing 80 comments in the last night is going to be really challenging. I'm just putting that out there. So it's better to do it now than later. If you don't write any comments, it's just 5% of your grade. So if you decide not to do it and risk the 5%, that's up to you. Exercises. So this next big bar right here is your exercises bar. That exercises bar is important because it's a checkoff. Did you actually do did you do a particular exercise? So this is a good example. So right here, this particular student missed exercise 107. So as you're looking from left to right along here, you're seeing green, 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 and then there's an orange. Oh, well, I must have missed something on that one. You will all, at some point during the semester, run out of time and forget to post something. And you'll have a hole like this. It's totally okay. Don't go back and try to freak out. Just make a new post and post it. No big. I'll check you off. No late penalty. Just I'll check you off. Now, if you get way, way, way behind, I might start dinging you a little bit for being late. But everybody makes mistakes. I get that. So you get free pass on a couple of them. without a problem. So the other thing that can happen when I'm grading is that you may have actually submitted, let's say, well, in this case, the person submitted 109, so it doesn't matter. But you may have submitted 109, and I might have graded before you submitted 109. So there might be a hole at the end. If there's a hole at the end, you don't have to repost, you don't have to do anything. I'll just come back, and the next round I'll make sure I grab it. It's just a matter of timing. As I go through all of these, it takes me a while to get through everybody. So you may have posted it by the time I finish the grading. Make sense? So don't panic about that if it's at the end. Chances are I'll catch it on the next round. It is possible. I'm human. There's 33 of you, 32 of you, and there's one of me. Sometimes I do make mistakes, and I miss one. And you're like, well, I posted it. Okay, I make mistakes too. Just come up, tell me, hey, I actually posted this one. I'll log in, I'll see it, and I'll go, oh yeah, my bad. Okay, so this is part of the reason I give you these grade sheets in the first place is you can audit me. You can make sure I don't make a mistake as I'm going through. So you double check. You'll get a grade sheet after every one of the assignments that you turn in. And I try to set it up so that you get a grade sheet and you get your grade back on the previous assignment on the day the next one's due, if that makes sense. So today, 102 was due, you got your 101 back, and you got your grade sheet. So when 103 is due, you should get a grade sheet with 102's grade on it. And it should be current at that point. If at any point in the semester you want to talk about your grade or whatever, of course, I'm happy to talk to you about it as well. As we keep going down into the big column here, this is your assignment 101. It gives you what your percentage grade would be on that, and then it gives you a description of what the brackets are and what the typical issues are as your grade starts to go down. If you're below a 69%, you probably should talk to me about because you missed something pretty big. The other thing is sometimes at the very end here, there'll be a little bit of extra text that'll be bold. It'll say late minus 10%, late minus 20%, something like that. That's if you got the late penalty applied. It might be you didn't post the description that was required, minus however many percent that was. So every once in a while, there's an extra little note that'll be in bold at the end of your little description there. So just be aware that shows up there. Let's see, as we come down here, we already went through pretty much everything getting to your final grade. The only thing I haven't talked about yet is your participation, which would be right there. That's your participation grade currently for the class. If you go right up to the top here, it'll tell you how many days of class you've missed, whether you've notified me of those absences or not, and also how many times you've been late. Those will be written across the top. That then affects this down here, which is your participation grade. If you're not happy with your participation grade, come to class more. Don't be late, and your grade will go up. Sound fair? So that's how the grade sheet works. If you have questions, first time everybody panics and whatever has questions, it's okay, we'll talk through it. Question for everybody or just you? Okay, go ahead. So on a regrade? So on a regrade, it's a little bit different. You won't actually see a regrade because the regrades happen at the end of the semester. So I don't actually do a regrade. Your grade sticks until the end of the semester. At the end of the semester, everything's turned in, your regrades are turned in, everything, class is closed. I sit down and do the final grades. I go through, I grade your portfolio, I grade any outstanding work, I go through all your assignments, make sure all your exercises are done. Basically, I finish. If you have an A, I don't bother doing the regrade because you can't get a higher A. It doesn't matter. You got an A, you got an A. If you're B or below, then I go back and look for your grades, your regrades. And at that point, I'll go back and pretend as if I never saw your first one and give you brand new grades for whatever regrades you did. So that's how the regrade works. You can do one regrade for each assignment. So you can do one for 101, one for 102, one for 103, one for 104. You don't have to wait until the end of the semester to post them. You can post them along the way. But when you do it, be really obvious. Like assignment 101, regrade in all capital letters. Like don't be shy about it. It's legal for you to do it. Just make sure it's really obvious so it's easy for me to see. Otherwise, I'm looking through and saying, wait, is that one a regrade? Is it not a regrade? You know, if it says regrade on it, then I'm going to see it, and it's not going to be a big issue. Yeah?
For example, I missed 2 classes. How do I make up for this?
You'll just do them and post them when you have a chance. So it'll be on your own time, and watch the lecture, do the exercise, and as soon as you do it, even though it'll be out of order, you make your post. So let's say we're going along, you missed a couple classes. Here we are at 112, and then suddenly you post 107 and 108. That's okay. I'll just go back and give you credit for 107, 108. So your turn in will be like 110, 111, 112, 107, 108, 113. It'll go out of order, but that's fine. That's all I still give you credit.
Do we have to wait for the lectures to be posted?
They are all posted.
I think the last two lectures are not posted.
They should be. I'll double check. But they should be posted. Usually they're posted the same day. And if they're not on the website, if they're not cross-linked, go to the YouTube channel because they'll be in the YouTube channel for sure. Any other questions about the grades? No, for those of you that trickled in a little bit late, I'll give you your grade sheets in a little bit, and you can go back and double check against it. Yeah?
It's kind of personal, but it's
Yeah.
missed 2 days, and everyone's mad.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Every once in a while I miss, it's rare when I miss somebody, but we'll sort it out. Don't worry about it. All right, on we go. So today, we're still in the graphic design realm. So we did graphic design 1 last class. Today we're going to talk all about type and typography. And then we'll come back and we'll do another lecture on the nitty-gritty about graphic design and layouts and that sort of thing. The two go hand in hand, and I like to start with typography because it's a little bit, if you can get a really good sense for typography, then the rest of the design starts to fall together really nicely. So we're going to start with that. Typefaces, I want to start with the definition of terms so that when I say something like an X height or an ascender or a descender, you have some clue as to what exactly I'm talking about. Because I think it's important to kind of think through this. So I'll start with something called style. You're probably already familiar with style because you've gone into the edit menu and you've changed your text to bold or italic for some reason. They're often used to provide contrast or emphasis. So let's say you were doing a citation or a footnote and you wanted to make it a little bit different from your body of text. You might italicize it or something like that. If you can, it's always better to choose the style from within the font family rather than the operating system default. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? So this is the operating system default on 2 fonts. So we just have these two in the operating system up here on the top here. We've got bold, italic, regular, or it's bold, italic, regular, and just italic, or something like that. And then below here we have an italicized version. And you say, okay, well that looks reasonable. It looks italicized, it looks bold, and whatever. However, if we pick within the font family, there's a distinct difference because the typeface designer has spent time actually thinking about what do the letter forms really look like when they're in this special state. And so if you look carefully at, say, the Z in Hazy, in the bold version of the Z, let me draw here so you can see it. If we look specifically right here, you can see that they haven't just unilaterally thickened all the sides. They've thickened the middle, and they've kept the top and the bottom nice and thin. The style of that letter is a lot more attractive than the Z that's down here that the operating system just kind of fattened it up a little bit. So the same thing happens when we look at the font family's italicized version. So the same thing, the style is a little bit nicer. It looks a little bit better because the typeface designer actually designed the style. So how do you get to these styles? Sometimes it's automatic. Sometimes your operating system knows to just substitute in the typeface style when necessary. However, sometimes you'll see in your font choice, you'll come down and you go to Helvetica New or Arial or something, and there'll be a side menu that you jump over and it'll say bold, thin, italics, etc. And so there'll be multiple versions. Then you're for sure getting into those multiple versions. I'll show you this in InDesign a little bit later as we go forward. Weight refers to the lightness or darkness of the letter forms marked by changes in stroke or line width. So the weight of a letter is based on how thin or thick the lines are that make up that letter. So we might have light, we might have medium or regular, and we might have bold or super bold, etc. So let's look at a range here. So we have a weight starting at 100 all the way down to 900. In the same font, these are different weights, so different thicknesses of individual lines that make up the letters. And you can see that there's a very big difference between thin at a weight of 100 all the way down to super at a weight of 900. Width refers to different widths of the typefaces within a family. We might have a condensed or a compressed typeface. We might have an extended typeface. So, okay, so how many of you in high school needed a little bit more length to your paper and you chose the extended font to make it a little longer, right? Nobody wants to admit that. Okay, but it's like a very common practice. Maybe you do it now. Okay, so the truth is, don't tell anybody. I'm going to tell you today how to do it where they won't know that you did it. Okay, so there's value to this class. I promise you there's value. So I can make your papers longer, no problem. It's not through that. X height. X height refers to the height of a lowercase letter without an ascender or a descender. Essentially, what is the height of an X? No surprise, it's called X height. And this can vary depending on the font that you're working with. It can be taller or shorter. And so it's a useful comparison. Cap height refers to the height of the capital letters. So we have an X height for the lowercase letters. We have a cap height for the uppercase letters. And the X height and the cap height vary by typeface, so depending on the font that you choose, and are useful comparisons. So if you want to combine two typefaces, for example, you want to pay attention to the X height and the cap height as to are they going to fit nicely together or not. So let's look at it here. We have our X height over here at the end. There's our letter X. And so our X height is from the baseline, which would be right here, all the way up to the X height, which would be right there. So that right there is our X height. Our cap height would be going on a capital letter from the baseline all the way, all the way up to the cap height. We have an ascender height and a descender height. These are for the letters that stick up or stick down from the baseline. The ascender height could be the same as the cap height. It could be a little bit taller. It depends on the font or the typeface as well. Counters are white spaces located inside and around letter forms. They affect the readability and the density of these words. Thin fonts at large type sizes have what are called open counters. There's so much space around the letters that they become difficult to read. They overpower the stroke itself. So it's a thin font, really big. The opposite is also true. If it's a bold font and it's really close together and really small, it gets hard to read because there's no space. There's no space in and around all the letter forms. So look at these two examples. Errors and errors. The big one is a little bit hard to read because you have to squint it. Wait a minute, there's a lot of space around these letters and they're thin. Same thing is true for the bold font that's really small. You have to kind of squint and say, wait a minute, what are those letters? Because they all kind of run together. Yeah, Brooke. Tracking is a way of adjusting for it, but not quite. Because this is referring to the space inside, like inside of the O, in between the R and the S. So it's not just the space between individual letters, it's the space inside of the letter as well. And so that's going to vary by the thinness or thickness. We'll get to tracking though. Small capitals are complete sets of uppercase letters that are, instead of being the cap height, they're the X height. They're often used when large capitals would result in unwanted emphasis in a body of text. So if you're doing a title, does it really matter? No. But if we're writing a paragraph, it does start to matter. I thought I had a slide for that. It's there. We'll do lining and non-lining figures first, and then I'll show you the paragraph, because it combines both of them. So when I say figures here, I mean numbers. Lining figures are numbers or numerals with the same width and height as a full capital letter. So they're full-size numbers. Non-lining numbers or non-lining figures share the same X height as a lowercase letter, and they have ascenders and descenders. And you're saying, wait a minute, why does this matter? Well, it matters if you're writing in a paragraph form. So here we are. We can look at these two paragraphs side by side. And as we start to read them, your eye jumps to things like $15, discounted by 32%, $10.50, because those are tall. Right? If we look at the paragraph on the right here, you can see that $15, 32%, and $10.50 are smaller, and they read in the flow of the paragraph as opposed to standing out. So by using the non-lining numerals, same thing happens with our small caps. Instead of our large caps, it allows us to read in the flow of the document rather than having certain things jump out at you. Ligatures. Ligatures are specially designed characters produced by combining 2 or 3 characters together. And so the truth of this is it's something you do naturally when you write. So my son, for example, his name is Bennett. And so if I was going to write his name, I would write the 2 T's and then I would cross the 2 T's. Right? That would be natural as part of the writing. In a computer, if I was typing the word and we didn't have these ligatures, it would type a T and a T next to each other. It's not natural. There's a weird break. So these kinds of things happen when you are writing on a computer. And we want the computer to fix these problems for us. So things like, FI, for example. Right? That dot up here is awkward. Where if we might do it like that instead, because the I kind of combines together. Let me show you some other examples. So here we go. FI, FFI, crossing the 2 F's at the same time. FFL. You can see that the first F becomes a little bit shorter. These are all things that you would do naturally when you were writing. Then we have discretionary ligatures. These are ones that the typeface designer may do because they think it looks a little bit better. Sometimes in an italicized version, they do more of it. And then we have a few contextual ligatures that have to do more with the tracking or the spacing between the letters that can be compensated for. So these are really important. Good fonts have these kinds of things built in. You don't have to do anything, and the computer should substitute the ligatures in for you. So if you type 2 T's together, a good font should combine those T's and cross them together. And you shouldn't have to do anything. And that's how you can separate the cheap free fonts that you can find online versus the really well-designed fonts. Choosing the right font. How many people have taken 121? How many people are taking 121? How many people turned in their first poster and had Daniel or Chi say, try it again, your font is wrong? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of smiles, right? So choosing the right font is really, really important. So when we think about choosing our font, we want to first start with what is the longevity of the piece? How long do we want this to withstand time? Is it going to be trendy or is it not going to be trendy? What's the purpose of the piece? You're doing a poster on a modernism. Picking a serif font is not the right choice, which is probably what you guys did. So if it's a modern poster, we would want to use a modernist font like a sans serif. And so we want to make sure those things go together. Is it going to be innovative or is it going to long-term be outdated? Those are all things we want to think about. Is it traditional or maybe too conservative? So, 2009, Avatar came out. They used a font called Papyrus. Guess what? In 2010, everybody loved Papyrus, and it was everywhere. Did it withstand the test of time? No, not at all. So now you can still see it on Windows and whatever. They're still floating around. But it was trendy, and then it went out of fashion. And so when you are thinking about designing something, you want to think very carefully about what font you choose, and is it going to become outdated over time? This is particularly useful to think about. A lot of times movies use trendy fonts. Lord of the Rings did it too. I don't know what the font was, but it's the same kind of thing where it shows up for a while and then you're like, wait a minute, I don't want to see that font anymore. So be aware when you're picking your fonts. When you're trying to decide which one is the right one, do side-by-side comparisons. Put it in a font, save a version of it, put it in another font, save a version of it, and see which one looks right, which one feels right. Is it readable? Does it evoke the correct emotion? Is it legible? There's a difference between readability and legibility. We'll get to that in a second. Does it reflect the needs of the client and the viewer? We talked a lot about client, viewer, and you, the designer, last class. Same thing. So here's an example. Right? It's a quote, Charles Dickens' quote. Bakersville, the right font was designed in the same country at around the same time as A Tale of Two Cities. Right? It's in subtle harmony with the content. Times New Roman isn't wrong, that's the one on the left, but it's not quite as carefully considered. Does that make sense? So if you, as the designer, really embrace this, you can think carefully about what is appropriate and how can you make that design choice on purpose. Another example here, doesn't matter what the content is, 2 side-by-side comparisons of 2 different fonts. And so as you're looking at this, you want to think about which one feels more readable, which one feels more legible, which one feels like it embodies the content. And those are all decisions that you as the designer are going to have to make. I think this is really fun. This is as close to science as we get in this class. It's the periodic table of typefaces, which is pretty entertaining. And I just throw it up there for the amusement value of it. This is another one that's kind of entertaining. This is when you're going to start some kind of a design process. You start in the center here and you work your way out. So in this scenario, let's say we were designing a logo. We'd come out to the logo box, and then based on our decisions, do we want it to be a serif or a sans serif? And then you'd move on over here, and you keep following along, and eventually you get to whatever the font is that you would choose. And it's kind of entertaining. The book one is interesting because if you go all the way through, the end result happens to be, well, if you go through and answer the questions the way I would answer the questions, you end up actually getting to the font I wrote the book in, which was coincidental. I didn't do it on purpose. That's Optima. Optima is kind of a weird hybrid. It's kind of a sans serif, but it appears kind of like a serif. So it's right in the middle of the two, which is nice. Anyway, doesn't matter. All right. So serif and sans serif. I mentioned serif and sans serif a fair number of times here. And what that means is that a serif has a little extra tail on the text. So on each letter, we have that little tail, and you can see it blown up down here at the bottom, on the bottom of the F, on the tops of the R's. All those extra little tails really help to read. And so if you pick up a magazine where the font's small, or you pick up a book and you're reading a paperback book, the font is almost always going to be a serif font because you can make the print smaller, you can make the space between the lines smaller, so you get more content on fewer pages, and it's still easy to read. A sans serif font, on the other hand, doesn't have those little tails. It's straight at the bottoms, which is a really clean, modernist type look. It's a great aesthetic. But it's a little bit harder to read. It requires the font to be a little bit larger, and it requires theoretically more paper to make it readable and enjoyable to read. The interesting thing is online, with blogs and with websites, we've gotten to the point where a large part of the fonts that are used online today are sans serif fonts because we don't have page limits. Doesn't matter if the font is a little bit bigger because we're not trying to cram it all into a book and the cost per page and all of that sort of thing. So we have an infinite number of pages, so we can make the font a little bit bigger, we can make it a little bit easier to read, and it doesn't matter. So it's important to kind of recognize the difference there. So here we have a sans serif on the left and a serif on the right. And you can generally read the serif font a little bit faster than you can the sans serif. Combining typefaces. So whenever you want to do a design project, you think about how do I combine typefaces together? Well, your first option would be just pick a font family and work within that family. Remember, families have different styles. They have the bold, they have the super, they have the thin, etc., depending on the font. You could work just within that one family, just within different sizes of the font, and you could have a great hierarchy. Of course, if you add multiple typefaces together, you could suddenly have a bunch of combinations that can really work nicely. So this is an example of all in the family. It's just bold versus a regular. And we get a nice hierarchy there. If we're going to combine a set of typefaces, we generally wouldn't combine 2 serif typefaces or 2 sans serif typefaces. We're always going to pick one serif and one sans serif. That way they're different from each other. They're getting us different things. They should have similar X heights. They should have similar widths. They should have similar cap heights so that they feel like they belong together. There's examples. These are all examples of pairings. Truth is, if you Google font pairs, there's a bunch of examples right there. And you could pick them from that list. And I think that's the easiest way of finding fonts that go nicely together. So here's a bunch of examples of a serif, or a sans serif and a serif font that are going together. Notice the X heights in both cases are the same, even though the ratios are a little bit different. This one on the bottom, the X height is taller versus the cap height, but this font and this font, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, ITC Wiedermann Book and ITC Fennis Regular. I don't even think I have those fonts. But in that scenario, they go nicely together because the X heights are the same and the ratio of the cap height to the X height is similar. Same thing on each of these, and that's an important distinction. You can always use a display or a script typeface for a title or a heading or something like that. And what I mean by the display or the script typeface is the typeface that's hard to read. You guys have all been invited to things before, or maybe your parents haven't been invited to a wedding and you see the fancy calligraphy on the front. If you imagined your English paper written in fancy calligraphy and you handed it in to your English teacher, she would probably shoot you because it was so difficult to read. Right? Same thing would happen if you picked like a big, bold, impact headline font and you turned in your English paper like that. Not the right solution. It's too difficult to read. However, for a heading or for something special, it works. And it works rather nicely. So it's certainly worth considering. Designing with type. Legibility and readability. There's a distinct difference between these, both of which are very, very important for communication. Legibility is the recognition of the individual letter forms and their relative position to the other letters. So we're looking at letters and their position to other letters. Readability is how the typography is presented to the viewer as words, lines, and paragraphs. So how easy is it to read, and how easy is it to distinguish the actual letters? So here, I apologize, this slide is a little bit blurry, but legibility, we're comparing at the top. Arial's pretty easy to read. Mesquite presents a bit of a challenge because it's hard to distinguish the individual letters. Readability, you want to use a type that is comfortable, not letter Gothic, as it might be harder to read. So there is a subtle difference between those. Notice in this scenario, readability, it's pushing a sans serif and a serif together. So the serif font is a little bit easier to read than the sans serif. Content, impact is great for a headline, but not so much if we were putting a bunch of words together into a paragraph. And then you want to think about context. Times New Roman for financial versus Comic Sans. Right? If you turned in a big financial paper and it was written in Comic Sans, they probably wouldn't take you very seriously. And maybe that was a strategy. That would be something like Elon Musk would do that just for the fun of it. Like, what do you think of this? Objective representation. This is practical, straightforward, clear, ordered presentation of information. Clear, strong hierarchy, easy to distinguish first, second, and third. Subjective representation is a little bit more interpretive or contextual. It's harder to do. It's focused on a theme or an idea rather than just establish the hierarchy and make it really clear and easy to understand. We want to think about both macro and micro perspectives. Macro perspective means how does the font fit into the overall design layout? Does it feel like it's the right size? Is it appropriate font choice? Those kinds of big questions. It's the format of the composition. It's the big decisions. The micro perspective, on the other hand, is the small details like the kerning, the spacing, the ragging. They ensure a clean presentation throughout the document, whatever it is. I'll talk about what kerning and tracking and stuff are in a little bit. So here, I can't even read what that says, but it's really nicely done. The typography is really beautiful. Symmetry and asymmetry. Do we want balance and harmony? Do we want something that's symmetrical, page to page? Do we want something that's asymmetrical, that has a lot of motion in it? And we'll talk a lot about these concepts next class during the layout portion of the class. Alignment. So this is the horizontal and vertical position of the typography within the margins. And so in this scenario, the alignment is what's creating how we're reading the document. It's creating relationships between this paragraph and that paragraph, this paragraph and that photograph. So this alignment is important. Typographic color refers to the relative density of a block of text. And I think one of the things that when you're first starting out and you're first writing out these paragraphs and whatever, a lot of times you just think it's a bunch of words. But if you stand back, if you're in the back of the room and you squint at this, certain paragraphs in this layout stand out more than others. Certain paragraphs appear darker than other paragraphs. So the truth is that that paragraph is a graphic element in the page. It's something that has weight. It's something that can counterbalance a photograph. And so as you start to think about that typographic color, depending on the font choice, the size, the style, that can make a big difference in terms of how heavy that block of text feels. Type size. You guys have all adjusted type size before. It's measured in points. Changes in type size often result in a nice hierarchy. So if you did nothing else and you wanted to establish a nice hierarchy, you could do a relationship of font sizes. Major heading, 16 point. Minor heading, 12 point. Body text, 10 point, for example. And if you stuck just within that, you'd have a nice, clear hierarchy, as long as you develop that proportionate scale of sizes. Case. Lowercase letters are more readable than uppercase letters. Uppercase letters tend to emphasize letter-to-letter recognition, which causes the person who's reading them to slow down as they read. So, architects typically write in uppercase letters. Can I say that? Is that fair? So what do they want you to do by writing in all uppercase letters? What are they forcing you to do? Slow down and read what they have to say. Not that they have any egos or anything. They're causing you to slow down because it takes a lot longer to read, and that then invokes this concentration. So for example, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word appear. The only important thing is that the first and last letter are in the right place. This is hard to read, yes? Try reading it like this. For example, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word appear. The only important thing is that the first and last letters are in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. It's a difference. So letter-to-letter recognition versus the lowercase letters, it's much easier to read the words and to think about it as words. And that obviously speeds up the reading. So kerning. Kerning and tracking are both important things to consider when we're doing this. Kerning adjusts the space between individual letters. It's used to correct collisions or unwanted weird spaces between letters. It allows the text to flow and read smoothly. This is, again, the kind of thing you would do naturally by hand. You write a T followed by a Y. You tuck the Y underneath the top of the T. Naturally, you would do that. Computers don't always do that. They might have the Y spaced out. It feels awkward. So we can adjust that with kerning. We can make those get a little bit closer together. Tracking, on the other hand, adjusts the spacing between words, lines, and paragraphs. Remember I told you I was going to tell you how to make the English paper a little bit longer? It's right here in your tracking. You spread it all out. It's proportionate though. So you give a little bit more space in between all of the letters. You get a little more space between all of the words. You get a little bit more space between all of the sentences and a little bit more space between all of the paragraphs. And suddenly your Word document went from being a page to being 2 pages or 3 pages. Right? So I told you there was value today. It also influences typographic color. The more you spread out those words and those letters, the lighter that text becomes as an overall compositional element. Leading is the spacing between lines of text measured from one baseline to the next. And so this is a little bit hard for you guys to transition. You've been working in Word your whole lives. I'm sorry. And Word does it like single space, 1.5 space, double space in terms of the space between the lines of text, right? So when we get into InDesign, it's done as leading and it's done as a point size. So it's no longer about double space or single space, though you could calculate that out yourself. It has to do with, I'm using a font that is 12 point, and so if I had my leading at 12 point, all of my lines would be exactly one on top of the other. Typically, if I wanted it to be, quote, single-spaced, it would be 14.7 points in between. If you had 12-point font, it would be 14.7. So you have just a little bit of space between. But it's from baseline to baseline is how they're measuring this. So if you wanted it to be double space, you would change that to be 24, and it would spread it out. So it's just different. It's a different way of organizing it. I'll show you where it is, but frequently people have that question as to where is this hidden. Tall X heights, heavy typefaces, sans serifs need more leading than shorter, lighter, wider, or serif typefaces. So remember how I talked about that if you were writing a magazine or a book and you wanted to cram more text onto smaller content and you use that sans serif, this is why. You don't need as much space in between the lines to still be able to read all of the pieces. So I'm going to show you some examples here. Design portfolio. I will do a whole lecture on portfolio, so don't worry, we're going to come back to portfolio. But I think this particular one was so well done with its fonts. The typefaces were just carefully considered. They're all sans serif fonts, but they have a beautiful hierarchy page to page. They're consistent. Well, that one doesn't even have any text, but it's pretty anyway. Even when we get into the super bold, it's the same font. It's just the super bold version. It's just really nicely, carefully considered typeface. These little fold-out pieces, same thing. And you can see the hierarchy here really clearly. We have the subheading above the main heading, then we have the body of text, and then we have a bunch of extra description down here that's really small. And so that hierarchy tells us what's most important, what's next most important, etc. Another example there. Another example here. And this one, I'm going to stop here because these end up being too blurry. You can't really see them well. But again, there's a use of your capital letter-to-letter recognitions that you can do side by side to cause people to slow down during the reading process. Okay, so we're going to take a little break. It's 8:50, so we'll come back at 9 o'clock, 9:01 or so, and we'll sit down and we'll do the demo part in InDesign. We'll talk all about all the type stuff, and then we'll do paragraph and character styles, etc. Okay, so about a 10-minute break. Yes. Okay, so we're going to start back up with your exercise for today. By the way, you did also get your Assignment 103 handout today, which is going to be a lecture series poster on for those of you that are architecture students. It'll be an architecture lecture series. If you're industrial design students, do an industrial design lecture series. So make it something that you're actually interested in. It needs to be an 11 by 17 poster. You can choose to use this semester's, and actually I have a bunch of these cards in my office. I'll go grab those and pass them out. You can use this semester's lecture series if you want, the people that are actually coming to speak, or you can make up whoever you want to have come speak. That's okay with me as well. It's going to be an 11 by 17 poster. And actually, the students who did the poster for this semester were in my class before and did the poster for the actual lecture series. So if you get good at it, the ACE Club may select you to be the one doing it. So it'll be 11 by 17. It is due on Wednesday the 13th. So not this Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. You will hand me a color 11 by 17 of it, and you will also post it online. So you give me both. As is normal, 3 comments, etc. Let me know if you have questions. Okay, so that is assignment 103, which you just got. You turned in assignment 102 this morning, so that's good. And today we're going to work on exercise 110, which is 2 parts. The first part is really learning how to work with type in InDesign, and the second part is having some fun with type, or at least I hope so. So we're going to start. I've gone ahead and I pulled up my exercise 110 page here because there's a few things that we're going to need. The first thing is a Word file, which is the Vitruvius's 10 books on architecture. I want you to make sure you download that. Oh, it looks like it's going to open it instead of download. There it is, downloading it. That's good. Make sure you save this onto your flash drive. So go ahead and show it and then copy it. And we're going to put it into the flash drive. I believe I already have it for today. And there it is. I already have it, but you'll put it there as well. And then we'll go ahead and open up InDesign. So I'm going to double click on InDesign and open it up. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new document. So I'll click the button to create a new document. And I'm going to go ahead and use just a regular standard letter size piece of paper. But I am going to change my units into inches instead of in picas. So it's 8.5 by 11. It's in inches. And I'll go ahead and click on Create. I can uncheck facing pages for now, too. It doesn't really matter. We're only creating one page today anyway. And I'll go ahead and click on Create. And that then gives me an overall layout for my 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which is represented by that white sheet. So previously, last class, we used the rectangular frame tool, if you remember, created a frame, and then with the frame selected, went to File and then Place, and we are able to drop in a image of our choosing. So I could go into my folder. I'm going to go into my folder from last class, which is 109. And I could drop an image in. There it is. Remember, I would right-click on it. I'd go to Fitting, and I could fill frame proportionally, for example, and we'd get that image. So that's just review from last class. The cool thing about InDesign is text works the same way. So I can have a text box. So I'm going to come over here on the left side. I'm going to click the T tool for the text tool, or the type tool. And I'll create a line of text. So we'll come over here. By the way, if I held down Shift, it's going to stay in proportion. There we go. I have my text column right there. I'm going to deselect it, or I'm going to click on my black arrow and click on the text box that I just drew. With the text box selected, I'll go up to the File menu and then choose Place, just like I did with an image. Only this time, I'm going to pick not an image, but my Word file. So there's my Word file. And I'll go ahead and click on Open. All right, so it's giving me a warning here that's telling me that it's currently set for fonts that are not included on this computer. That's probably because I created the text file on my Mac. And so it doesn't have the same fonts, or they're called different things. So when it comes in like this, if you get this error, you can choose to find the fonts and replace them now, or you could replace them later. It doesn't really matter. If I were finding the fonts, I would come in here and replace that with Times New Roman, probably, because that's what Windows calls it. Times New Roman. And we'll do Times New Roman, bold, change all. There we go. So I just corrected that ahead of time. You don't have to correct it ahead of time. You could correct it after the fact. You could change the font after the fact, because obviously that's what we're going to be doing today anyway. So I have this text box that's been put into my page. The size is obviously a little bit large, coming in as a default. But notice in the text box that at the bottom right corner here, there's a little red icon. It's hard to see that on the screen as red. It looks like black on the screen, but on your computer screen it will show up as red. That has a little plus sign in it. That little plus sign is saying, guess what? There's more text that can fit in this text box. So it keeps going past this. So I could actually come back up to my type tool. I could come over here and I could draw another text box, like that, for example. And I can choose to have this text flow into this text box. So I'll come down here, I'll click on that little plus sign, and when I click on that plus sign, you can see that my icon gives me a little chain, and then it loads up the text as a preview. And when I do that, I can then click into this text box, and the text is going to continue. I'm going to move this image out of the way for just a second here. There we go. And so that text continues. The neat thing about this is that if I said, you know what, I wanted this text to start down here, it automatically adjusts where the text is. Likewise, if I said, you know what, in the middle, I really want this text to come back up to right there, guess what? It'll flow through the document. So no matter how you adjust these text boxes, the text continues to flow through them because they're chained together. You can run into a problem if I created a third box, for example. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let me do this. Let me shrink this one up. Let me create a third box. Like that. I will come back to my black arrow, and I'll chain the text into that third box. There we go. Now, where I can run into trouble is if after the fact I rearrange these, and I put this down here, and I put this back up here, it's still going from here into this and then coming back up to the top. So you have to pay some attention in terms of how they're chained through. But generally speaking, once you've chained them through, you have a lot of flexibility in how you adjust that text. So now it's time to start looking at the fonts themselves, or the paragraphs themselves. Brooke, did you have a question?
When you placed your fonts, like what type of file did you use?
The text, you mean?
Yeah.
It was just a Word file.
And it just placed it on your automatic.
Right, just like an image. So instead of picking an image, I picked a Word file.
Okay.
And it puts the text in automatically. The assumption there would be that if you did your writing, let's say you were doing a history paper, you would do your writing in Word or in some word processing program, and then you would do your layout work in InDesign. Adobe does make something called InCopy, which is their writing program, but we don't have it installed on the machines, nor do I recommend it. Most of you are comfortable in Word. Again, I'm sorry. Maybe you could pick something a little bit better someday to organize your thoughts. But whatever word processing program you choose to use, that generally makes some kind of a text file, whether it's a Word document, an RTF, or just a regular text file that would allow you to drop that in directly into InDesign. OK, so now it's time to start establishing the font itself. So I could start at the top here. Let me zoom in a bit. And I could say, you know what? I'm going to make a big heading for Chapter 1 right here. And I can do that by selecting the text. And across the top ribbon here, I have a whole bunch of options when it comes to the text. So I've got the ability to choose my font, the ability to choose my style. I've got the ability to change the size. And I've got the ability to change the leading, or the space in between lines of text. There's a few other options here that we'll get to in a second. All of that is also available, no, I don't want to learn more here, in the typography windows. Those are not currently shown by default. If I want to show them, I'm going to come up to my Essentials workspace, click the downward facing arrows, and instead choose Typography. We're dealing with type today, so choosing Typography makes sense. That gives us all of our type windows that are available here. We're going to concentrate first on our character styles, or just our character adjustments. So if I click on character, this is where we would change the font. This is where we would change the size, the style, the size, etc. So as I look at Chapter 1, I'd say, you know what? I'm going to change the font first. And so I could come into, I don't know, I can choose a different font here. Trying to find one that, there we go. So I can choose a different style if I wanted to. That one only has regular available, so it's going to be the Copperplate Gothic Bold. And then I can say, okay, I want that to be maybe 20 points. There we go. And we'll leave my leading the same, and all the rest of this seems okay. I have a few other options here that I want to point out. As we come down here, we can scale the overall height of the text. So I'm going to pick just one letter to show you this. And I could increase the scale of that one letter so that it ends up being taller if I wanted to. Not quite sure why I would do that, but it is available for us. We'll go back to 100%. I can increase the width of a letter. So I can make that letter a little bit longer if I wanted to. I could make it a superscript where I push the letter up or I push the letter down. These work both directions, so if I wanted it to go down, I would go into the negative numbers and it would go down if I wanted it to. We'll leave that back at 0. And then I also have the ability to basically slant the letter. So this font didn't have italicized available to me. So if I wanted it to be slanted over at, say, 30 degrees, I could choose to have it slanted over at 30 degrees. Or maybe that's too much. I could slant it at 15, for example. So we'll go ahead and set it back to 0. These are all character styles. Character styles essentially mean we're addressing the letters themselves, the font on the letters themselves, not the paragraphs. So I have this first one set up. OK, that looks pretty good. I'm going to move down into this next section. I'm not going to worry about the hyperlink there. We'll get rid of that. And we have the education of the architect. I'm going to adjust this. So we'll go ahead and leave this one in Times New Roman. We'll leave it in bold. And actually, the size is pretty good. Well, let's change the font. That's such an ugly font. All right, we'll change to this, the education of the architect. And again, we only have regular as our option. So I've adjusted the character style of the heading. When we get down into the paragraph itself, I can do the same thing. So I can select all of the paragraph here, and I can say, you know what, I want that, I don't know, we'll just leave it in Times New Roman right now, but the size is way too big. Let's drop that maybe to 10 point. There we go. That looks pretty good. Looks like we have a spacing issue at the very end. Probably means that there's an extra bit of space somewhere. Well, we'll have to sort that one out. And so I have that established. Now, the character style, that's nice that I was able to establish it for this. Sometimes you want to make this copy to the rest of, or to another group of text. Let me use the bold text here as an example. So this here, right, is bolded, manual skill and scholarship, to provide emphasis. So I could, for example, go into my character style and I could say, you know what, I'm going to change that to be a different font. No, that's a terrible font choice. There we go. So I like this. It's standing out. It feels good. I'd like to be able to reuse this on all those bold words. So what InDesign allows us to do is it allows us to create something called a character style. So we've worked with the character menu. The character styles is essentially a way of saving our style to be able to reuse it. So I could go to character styles and I could say, OK, let's create a style. This character style 1 is going to be for a bold word, for example. And so this bold word, then, I would want to apply to this bold word. So I'll select it and then choose the bold word. And notice that the font and the size and everything change. We come down here. I could select that, and I could go to bold word. I think this might be missing. So the reason that it's highlighting in pink is because the it's looking for a bold version of the font style. So we need to choose it as a regular version to commit to it being regular, and that should have gone away. At least I thought that's what the error was. What's my error? OK. Well, we'll figure it out. Not sure why it's highlighting in pink on me. But the point is that anywhere that I have this, I can choose that bold word character style. That shows up fine there. There's another one right there. Bold word character style. If I decide after the fact that I really didn't like the Bauhaus font, I can go back into my character style. I can change, say, let's go in here, and let's change the font to Berlin Sans, for example. And I can say OK. And suddenly they all change. They're supposed to change to Berlin Sans. What happened here? There it is. I think it had nested styles. I apologize. I never like it when it doesn't work. There we go. So all of them change. Same thing happens. I could come back in here. I could say, you know what, I didn't like that anymore. Or, for example, I wanted all of them to be a particular color. I say, I want all of those to be red. Say OK, and they all turn red. So once you've established a style, you can edit the style in everywhere that the style has been applied. you can very easily change and make adjustments to it. So it's always useful to think of this rather than just changing individual styles. Go ahead and create a character style for this. So for example, I might do a character style for this one. This would be my heading. Call this heading. This would be my chapter. And if I was long enough, if I had multiple chapters, then I would just change the character style on each of the headings and each of the pieces here. So we've done character. Let's get into paragraphs. So on the paragraph styles here, or we'll just use the regular paragraph for a second. I have the ability, I'm going to work with this second paragraph right there. All I have to do when I'm adjusting paragraph is have my cursor inside of the paragraph. I don't actually have to select the paragraph. And I can change, say, the justification. I could align that paragraph to the center. I could align it to the right. I could align it to the left. I could have it where it justifies so that it fits both edges. Or I could have it where it has a ragged edge, depending. The ragged edge tends to be a little bit easier to read, just an FYI. OK, so then we get into indents, for example. So in this paragraph, I could indent and have it pushed over a little bit. I can indent from the left. I can indent from the right. I can indent the first line separate and apart from everything else. I could even push the first line backwards if I wanted to. Oops. Let's see. I could add space before the paragraph. I could add space after the paragraph, or decrease space after the paragraph. So I have a lot of flexibility here. As we keep coming down, I have something called a drop cap. And what a drop cap does, let me eliminate my indents. So we're back to a regular. What a drop cap does is it makes the first set of letters larger, or to take up multiple lines. You've seen this in like old books and stuff. Essentially what I can do is I can say, I want the first letter to take up 2 lines. Oh, come on. There it is. Sorry, I had these backwards. First one is the number of lines. So we could start at, there's 1 line, there's 2 lines, there's 3 lines. Second one is the number of characters that's included. So do I want the period included? If I keep going, eventually I start adding text. So just like my character styles, I can use paragraph styles to my advantage here. So if I like this particular paragraph style, I can go ahead and go to my paragraph styles. I can create a new one. And I will call this one maybe drop cap. And then all I have to do is click inside of another paragraph, choose the drop cap style, and it's going to copy that drop cap style for me. So we can go over to here at number 4. We can go into the drop cap style, same thing. The advantage is, again, we can go back and we can edit the drop cap. You know what? On my drop cap, there we go, I really wanted it to be only 2 lines. So we make that adjustment. We go ahead and say OK, and then it corrects all of them. So starting to establish this as a strategy for organization can really make a big difference. An alternative to this, let me go back to this. I'm going to go back to normal here. There it is. I could get into my paragraph styles. I could create a paragraph style that's blank to start from. There it is. And I could say this is a numbered list. I can come in and I could say, OK, we're going to indent this. And again, these are all the same options that are available here. I'm just creating them through this list here. And I want to come over bullets and numbering. There we go. And I could say that I want this to be numbers. It's format 1, 2, 3, 4. Alignment left. Do I want the first line? So let's indent over and let's go backwards there. And then we can go ahead and say OK. And in this scenario, it's numbering the paragraph for me. and obviously the numbers are off, but you get the idea, where it's doing the numbering. And this would be if I was writing it instead of copying Vitruvius text. The advantage here is, again, all I have to do is select each paragraph, change it to numbered list, and it's suddenly part of the rest of the numbered list. So I can really customize these to my advantage. The purpose of working with this Vitruvius text is that you can mess around with it and don't feel like you're going to screw it up. This is the learning process today. I want you to play around and start to understand, even if it ends up looking ugly, like mine does. That's okay. I want you to learn the process. So a couple other things. Anybody ever tried to work in Word and add more than one picture to a page in Word? Word gets real cranky when you start to do that, right? So InDesign allows us to seamlessly integrate pictures. So I kept this picture over here. If I drop this picture in, with the picture selected, I can go up to a window called Text Wrap right here. And with this Text Wrap window, I can choose how I want the text to wrap around the image. So in this scenario, it goes over the top. The next option here would be wrap around the text. And as I move this, it's going to wrap the text. Oops. That was not what I wanted. It's going to wrap the text. Let me arrange just to make it a little bit easier. It's going to always wrap the text around wherever I place this object. If I resize the object, it's going to keep wrapping around there. So I have a few other options available here under my text wrap. I could set a border or padding around so that I always have a certain amount of space around my object. Right now they're set to all be symmetrical. I could choose to have it where it breaks and jumps the whole object as opposed to wrapping on one side or the other. So play around with these if you bring in an image, because you'll learn a lot about how you can work with it. The great thing is I can have multiple images, and no matter how many images I put in, it will still always wrap the text around the images. So there's no constraints like in Word where it gets really cranky when you put too many images in. So you have a lot of flexibility there. Obviously, I could replace the image with something else. So today, paragraph styles, paragraph window, character window. Text wrap is also important for you to explore. Once you feel like you have a pretty good understanding, you're going to move on into the word art section of today. And what I'm going to ask you to do with this, I'm not going to demo this, but it'll practice more work with the character palette. Probably not so much with the paragraph palette, but definitely with the character palette. You're going to create some word art that reflects you as a designer. So if you do a Google image search, for word art, there's going to be some where they're actual people. I'm not asking you to do that. What I want you to do is create you could do something like this where it's a letter. You could also do just basic compositions like this one, for example, where you're combining different fonts together. You're learning how to work with the text tool, how to rotate, how to orient text, etc. So something like this is just fine. There's not a special composition to this. You don't have to do the bride and the groom, for example. But some of these things are interesting. So you can do some Google searching to find something like that. That one, for example, is a pretty good one. And it has to do with just how the text is combined together. That's the important part. So I'm going to ask you to do that as part 3. You're going to export your work and post this. Hold on a second. I want to make sure I tell you. Right. The one that you're posting is the word art, not the Vitruvius text. Oh, the other thing that I do mention is sometimes the fonts that are on the computer are just not the fonts that you like, and you want to choose another font. You can install your own fonts. There is a tutorial written up about how to do it using a little portable application that will allow you to install it. I forget in this version of Windows whether they'll let you temporarily install it or not. I'll double check that. We'll come back to that a little bit later on in the semester. So it's something, if you want, you can go ahead and load up an alternate font. It's there under part 2. You don't have to, though. Are there any questions? Nope. All right, I'll let you guys go.